Hello and welcome to Play Pause Turn. In this podcast we discuss all things to do with TV, films, games and literature. We give our thoughts on the media we've been enjoying, old or new, and comment on anything topical. Our hosts today are myself, John, and I have Amy and Alex, and we have our usual intro question. This one is related to the first part of our podcast, which is about Loki. I am saying it right. It is Loki, not Loki.
Yeah.
Loki.
Yeah.
I always get that wrong. Loki and the Black Widow. Okay, so here is the intro question. I'll start with Amy. If you were a variant of yourself, what variant would you be, Amy?
I think I'd be a non-teacher variant, because I did have a glimpse of that once upon a time. I would literally do any job. I really don't mind, because I absolutely love teaching. I love bringing that wonder to children, and it is fantastic. But it would be really interesting to see how life worked out if I had my evenings and weekends back, because there is very little respite apart from sleep. So, I wonder what would happen if I had time.
You'd have a lot less holiday, for a start.
It is true, but I could take it when I like.
That's true. And of course, as everyone knows, as a fellow teacher here, it's not really holiday. Those gaps in between term times, what we call cashing in our overtime.
Absolutely.
Alex, how about you? If you're a variant, what sort of variant would you be?
Well, it feels like this is us contemplating what we'll do like once COVID has finished. So it feels very much like that. So I've said I might be doing something completely different, like being a gardener in Scotland, and because it's something completely unlike me. Whereas I spend a lot of time on computers at the moment, and I'm starting to hate Teams calls, like starting to loathe them a little bit. But I think most people are. So yeah, something to get me completely away from that and see whether I would be a different personality. What would be my interests if I wasn't just such a geek from a screen point of view?
I think you'd still be a geek, Alex, just a geek that does gardening.
You're probably right.
Because geek means anyone with passion about a specific thing, so it doesn't really matter if it's tech or gardening.
Yeah, very
really?
true.
I'm with Amy. I think I'd like to have something different to teaching. I very nearly took a different strand of my timeline where I went going to the art-based education. I didn't, sadly, but I do remember my art teacher being very upset that I wasn't taking art A-level. And it's still, I know you're not meant to have regrets, but it's still one of my biggest regrets because I still love design and drawing. That's my one thought. The other thought, of course, because a variant could be anything. If you've been watching Loki, you'll realise that you can even be an alligator. I would quite like just to come back as a Jedi with a working lightsaber. I mean, it's very simple.
Nice.
Yeah, I've been watching the Star Wars again, the prequels.
Oh, right.
With my son. He's never seen them, but he likes Jar Jar Binks, or the idea of him anyway. Mm-hmm. I quite like just to run around with a lightsaber. Sort of. I mean, it would help with the gardening, definitely. It would help with the hedges, definitely. But that would be my variant option, I think. One or two.
Interesting. Well, I guess some of that's practical.
Yeah, well, yes, obviously, yeah. And also really good for making toast, if you've seen The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as well.
Yes.
We're going to talk about Loki as our main topic, and we're also going to be talking about Black Widow. But let's start with Loki. At time of recording, we've literally all just finished watching the season finale. So I think it's probably worth mentioning now, because I think we're going to go straight into spoiler territory. If you've not seen all 6 episodes of Loki, I would pause and then watch it and then come back to the podcast, because there are so many kind of plot-based twists and reveals. It would be terrible to listen to this first. We're going to talk about them now. So let's start off with our overall thoughts of the series. Amy, what did you think?
I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed getting extra time with, obviously, Loki, but also these other characters. And I think in all of these Marvel series that have been popping up, that's been really, really nice to get to know characters we maybe didn't get to know as much before. I like how within Loki, everything is just canon. Everything works within the existing knowledge. And that very first episode where it says, this is the moment where Loki springs up and this is what happens then, was so delightful, because it's a real kind of, oh, I remember that. I'm part of the team. I'm part of the gang. I remember that bit. Well done, me. And yeah, I just love how it all gives us kind of extra insight into this new organisation, the TVA, and all the rest as well.
We'll talk about the TVA later on, won't we? Because that is quite an interesting concept. How about you, Alex? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I definitely enjoyed the series. So I could watch Marvel all the time, really. So one of the things that I think one of the challenges, having seen the finale, things start to have been laid out to you in the finale, whereas before the finale, I felt like it wasn't really clear how we were going to get to the place we needed to go to, and I felt like sometimes because things kept changing, it was sometimes a little hard to keep up, because each of those 6 episodes is really dense. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I had in my mind that it would be a little bit like, do you remember a TV show called Sliders?
Yeah, I remember Sliders.
So in my head, I thought, oh, this is going to be Loki, sort of experiment, going from one place to another place to another place. And I just had in my mind, a bit like Sliders, but with Marvel. And it didn't. It wasn't like that at all. So, it was in that respect. I thought, not quite what I expected, but
I really enjoyed Sliders. I wish I could watch that again. Actually, now you made me think of it.
Yeah,
Can you see it? Is it on any streaming service?
I'm not sure. I'll find out. But
okay, find out for me. Yeah,
I'm sure we named one of our cats after a character, Maximilian Arturo.
We did. Max, yes, that's very true.
Wasn't that the main guy?
Yeah.
Yes,
he was. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I have a bit of a habit of listening to sort of breakdown podcasts for these series as well. And we don't tend to do that. We tend to give our thoughts when the whole season's gone through. But I quite like, and again, you might have a divided opinion on this. I quite like hearing people pick apart the little secrets and giving me a bit of understanding. And I think that I did that with Westworld, and I did that with Game of Thrones, because obviously I was quite new to the IP at the time when it came out. And I've done that with a different podcast I've been listening to called the Still Watching Podcast, which is very good if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, because it interviews a lot of the creators of the show as well. So I think I felt less in the fog, if that makes sense, with some of the plots, because it's been explained to me. I don't know whether you think that's a fault, a good or a bad aspect of the show. I mean, the show should be able to explain itself. I don't know how much you thought it required pre-knowledge of the Marvel comics. I think if you're a real Marvel, archivist and historian, then you probably would have seen how this show ended, because there were loads and loads of clues for it. I think personally, and we've all seen Black Widow recently. We've all enjoyed the Winter Soldier series and WandaVision. I think this is my favourite Marvel creation to date.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the only other one, is Logan, really, for me. And I think, is Logan a Marvel film or is it a Sony film?
I don't know.
To look that one up. I don't know if it's not part of the MCU, is it? Because it's X-Men.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably not Sony, sorry, Fox. But
yeah,
I think I'm starting to get a bit old, and I'll mention this later on in the podcast. I'm starting to enjoy slower burner series more than actiony, bing bang bosh, action scene films. I think I agree with Amy. I really enjoyed the way it fitted into the MCU, and it blended the themes and the stories together without any kind of jarring feeling of like, oh, let's just shoehorn a character in for the sake of it. I think the themes were very, very thoughtful. They're very mature themes. I don't mean, they rely on you being a bit more intelligent. I think that bodes really well for Marvel. It strikes me that Marvel are starting to really understand how to write a good story. And I think because they've drawn in some excellent writers, I mean, a lot of the writers for this series came from Rick and Morty.
Oh, right.
And Rick and Morty is a sort of universe time-hopping series, although, a lot more sort of madcap. But they're very good in kind of encapsulating a story in a short amount of time in each of those episodes. Whereas I think Loki really kind of drew it out quite cleverly. and it really relied on those themes. It was confident in the themes it was using, and that really showed at the end of the series. So I think with more series to come, like is it Secret Invasion?
Yes, that's right.
See, I think that's going to be really interesting as well. I wonder how that's going to link, and I wonder now that we've had this reveal of the What If series.
Mm-hmm.
That What If series makes a whole lot more sense now that we've seen these 6 episodes as well, and we'll talk about that later on as well. So I'm really excited about what they've written and exploring themes that probably don't pop up in the films, where you need to have your 2 hours of action and a good resolution at the end. Mm-hmm. So I'm really looking forward to that. Really, let's boil down a bit deeper now, and I wanted to discuss the look of the show initially, the design. So what were your thoughts on design, Amy? You're a big fan of the show, despite not really having any other thoughts on it. Have you thought further about this kind of aspect of the show?
Well, in terms of the way it looks and the design, I like that it's very dark. It's very dark all the way through. I'm trying to think back now, and I'm struggling to find points where it's remotely light.
I think when they were in Pompeii.
Apart from Pompeii, yeah. I'm struggling to think of this. In all honesty, I just really enjoy it. I don't have that many views on the design. I think what I'm probably waiting for, John, is for you to say your bit, and then I say, I agree.
Okay.
Why don't you go second then,
yeah.
John?
Okay, I'll go second. Shall we? Do you know what? We'll pretend no one ever heard that. John, what do you think about the design?
I've done a bit of research on this because I'm a very big fan of this aesthetic. I mean, it's so the set designer, production person on the show was a chap called bear with me, 'cause it's quite hard to say. He's a guy called Kazra Farahani. And I read a really good article in, I think it was The Verge, about his inspiration and for the sets in the show and kind of the props they use as well. And I think if you live in America, you might recognise some of the places they actually use to film, or they've obviously played around with the way they look. But yes, the modernist design in the show is excellent, and it harks to sort of brutalist and neo-futurist architecture. And they also talked about sort of the Soviet socialist art. And you see that kind of in the propaganda around the walls of the TVA, the Time Variance Authority. And I like this. I think it's a very clever decision to choose something that looked like it's grabbed aspects of technology from all the different sort of times they've been in. Well, because they can go to any time they want to, can't they? Without making it look like it's... I think if you look at science fiction from the 80s, it very much dates itself with the props and technology they use. Whereas this could be any time, and it's very clever. And Kazra said that when they designed the technology for this series, they were, what if digital technology was never really taken on board? So they kept going forward with the analog technology beyond our current sort of technological level. And I like the fact that they've kind of like, well, what would happen if analog just kept going? It's like sort of neo-futurist hipster future almost, isn't it? Really, the design, and I thought that was really clever. And they used old CRTVs for their props, and they used some old computers as well. Quite often, what would happen is the computer was so old when they tried to mod it for their set, the plastic cases were so brittle they'd fall apart.
Oh wow!
So a few of the props they basically rebuilt themselves based on old designs. But the TemPad's really cool. I was reading another article about a TemPad actually. The Verge are doing a very clever article reviewing it as if it's a mobile phone.
Oh, nice!
So they've done it as an actual review of the TemPad with all the features, but linked it to all the things that go on in the show, like when it smashes. Well, it's not a very rugged design. Even when they fall very slightly, it breaks, and you need recharging it. You need like a sort of a planet changing event to recharge it. So it's a very clever article, but it did highlight like the aesthetic, this sort of monochromatic sort of orange and black screens and the almost steampunk wood paneling to it. So for me, I love production design in these shows. And I think they're the unsung heroes, aren't they? The set designers. We always go on about the actors and the directors, but actually, these are the people that create the world. So I found it really fascinating. Alex and Amy, any points on that?
Oh, God, no.
Well, do you know what, John? You took the words out of my mouth there. I totally agree with everything you just said. There are a couple of things that I did spot that I thought were nice little homages. So there's a film that I absolutely love. It's one of my old favourites, which I'm sure many people have heard of, called Time Bandits.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the key things in Time Bandits are these windows or doors through time that you can step through. And they appear and disappear in an incredibly similar way to the ones that we see the TVA using here, just a different colour palette.
Well, they did mention that they were inspired by Brazil and 12 Monkeys. There's a big sort of Terry Gilliam aesthetic in it, isn't there? Was that you were about to say? Sorry.
Well, there was kind of the Terry Gilliam link, but also the other thing I spotted right at the very end of the last episode, nearly the end anyway, I saw a little flying yellow taxi cab, and they could have had any little flying vehicle they wanted, but they went for a little yellow flying taxi cab that looked very, very much like the little yellow flying taxi cab that I hold very dear to my heart from Fifth Element. So yes. I did spot a few little things just popping up, just to keep my old brain ticking over. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I loved it. I think they really did work at the timelessness of the space, which I think is important, and the fact that it felt like it had been there a long time, which obviously it had, but it kind of... The thing is, it's like totally different from something like MIB, for example, where everything's all shiny and new and trying to show off all the things that it can do, whereas this has just got a level of like establishedness to it, and I think that the using the analog alternatives really helps, and I think it just sort of plays into the fact that, you know, this isn't a technology piece, this is a people piece. This is, you know, something needs to be changed, go and change it, not oh, we've got this super thing that will just solve, you know. It's like, no, it's people. So I like that. And yeah, no, I just liked the sort of architecture. I could think that, you know, it's the kind of place that I'd love to spend time in, you know, a former Russian hotel or something like that, which has been, you know, very, very a bit Art Deco and a bit brutalist, and yeah, that sort of, it appeals. Just it just fascinates with me out of it. So, the thing that came to mind was comparing it to something like The Good Life. Not The Good Life, Good Place.
I was going to say that Good Life.
You mean Felicity Kendall and Richard Bryars?
No, that's not what I meant. I just put the wrong thing in. Yeah, but a good place. Because that's another example where they've got, you know, there being, you know, heaven and hell, but obviously it's an internal place, and so things happen in quirky ways. But yeah, there's something about it. It just was plausible. Is not necessarily the right word, but it kind of felt like.
Felt lived in, didn't it?
Yeah, it could work. Yeah, that's the thing. It felt like, oh, okay, this is of course this is how you do it. You don't need all that technology. You just need to have an army of people doing this thing at exactly the right time. Yeah, that would work.
I mean, it was when you've got people like, I forget the actor's name now. It'll come to me in a second. But you've got like this sort of desk clerk who is actually in The Good Place as well.
Oh right.
Yes, a guy called John Levine, who's called a paperwork clerk as a character, who was also in. He was. You have to help me out here now. It's been a while since I watched A Good Place. Who is the Korean character? Is he Korean or is he Chinese? He comes from that dodgy part of LA and goes on about his baseball team the whole time, or American football team.
Jason Mendoza.
Yeah, Jason Mendoza. His mate back home that he gets into scrapes with. That is John Levine. I can't remember his name now. Sorry, I'll look it up in a second. He briefly features near the beginning. Have I got the right guy? Maybe I got the wrong guy. But he was very funny. No, it wasn't him. It was Eugene Cordero. I'm thinking of.
Oh,
the guy who plays Casey.
Okay.
Yeah, Eugene Cordero.
But apart from that minor fact, you were absolutely
Yeah,
correct.
I got the wrong name. But yeah, he was in The Good Place. He was very funny. He was his mate basically, Pillboy. That's it, Pillboy. Just remind Pillboy.
Oh, okay.
And I think because there are links between the creators of The Good Place and Loki, so there's kind of a lot of shared creativity and shared actors. And I think it's great because he was a very different character, but I saw him straight away and thought, oh yeah, it's Pillboy. But he's sitting on his computer playing a video game, but it's all in sort of monochrome as well. Because actually you would do if you're sitting in an office and you're a bit bored and you've got a drawer full of infinity stones that you're using as paperweights. The amazing becomes the mundane. I thought it was quite clever how they kind of made it look lived in. And indeed, right. Well, we need to get to the meat of this. And this series has an incredible story. What were your thoughts on the story, Amy?
Well, I do like a conspiracy theory. I think they're always fun. So the idea that everyone's bought into this idea of a society where there's a TVA and then everyone else, but actually it turns out there isn't just the TVA and then everybody else. The fact that, and this is a major spoiler, all the people in the TVA are themselves variants that have been taken. That's a nice conspiracy theory, and I like how that's brought to light as part of this story as well. So generally, I think the main themes of that, I like the conspiracy theory bit. I like the idea that there are lots of different Lokis. That's a really fun element for me. But I'm going to be honest, I'm a really big fan of the series. I fell asleep in the finale.
Oh dear.
Sorry, everyone. But we'll talk more about that aspect of things later.
How about you, Alex?
Yeah. What was
Did you stay
interesting?
awake?
Yeah, no, I stayed awake for
Okay.
all of it, so that was okay. Yeah, no, it's interesting because you're always sort of taught that Loki's a trickster. He will always double cross, and he's always agent of chaos, and this kind of turns some of that on its head. I mean, he's still trying to do the chaos bit, but really he's part of it is just not having to be sort of limited by the TVA, and you can kind of relate to that, and then the things that he does tend to be tending to be more and more human as the series goes on. So you kind of almost get to a point where you're like, the superhero aspect of him is kind of a sideline. So I quite like that because it's an interesting part of him that we haven't really explored. There's not really ever been any consequences for him, and this is a case where it felt like he was growing as a character. So and it was quite nice how they did that through some of the existing places and things that he's done. I would have quite liked them to take a lot longer to do that because some of the scenes that were in there it felt like a nod, but then it happened so quickly it moved on, and it wasn't I kind of felt like if you'd have had more time to appreciate it would have had more impact when we get to the finale and he has to make some choices.
Like a 10 episode series, do you mean? Or...
It's difficult, but I think the problem is that they obviously had a clear idea of pace that they wanted to do in the episodes. It's
the Rick and Morty effect, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. And
that quick sort of snappy get through and get lots of themes.
Yeah,
out there.
Which is good, but the problem with it is it's great for action, but sometimes the character aspect gets lost. So I do think that they got really good balance. So I don't feel like it was too slow or too fast. For me, I needed more time to soak it in. I probably need to rewatch it and just enjoy some of those bits a little bit more. Definitely, if you have watched some of the previous Thor's and Avengers movies, read the comics and stuff, then definitely, if that's the case, you're going to appreciate this because there's going to be lots of nods and lots of things that you're going to go, oh yeah, I know, that's brilliant. I remember that. So I think in that respect, it does sort of achieve what it meant to. Maybe I just need a bit more time.
I mean, I like the fact that it has similar themes in some respects to The Good Place. There's definitely like a philosophical veneer running through this show, and the main theme, as is really clearly laid out to you by the end in the finale, is the choice between free will and chaos, or stability and no free will. And it's the thing that both Sylvie and Loki are fighting for throughout, when they realise what's going on. And they realise that everything is predestined, predetermined, and they're desperately trying to find the big baddie to kind of upend this scenario they're in. And initially they think it's the timekeepers, and those turn out to be just figureheads. And then it's, the TVA. Let's take down the TVA, and then it's the character at the end, which we could talk about later on. And I like that, and I also like the theme that, as you mentioned before, can Loki be better? Can he be a better person? And the thing he discovers through this show, especially when he goes to the Void at the end, is he's the king of outcasts. Everywhere you look, every timeline, as soon as Loki shows any sign of being good or changing for the better, he gets pruned and sent to the Void. And it's full of all these characters that have been sort of on the cusp of being a better person, goes out, gets thrown out. And what is it about Loki's character, about him being good, that can affect this sacred timeline? And I think that's really interesting, because it makes you think, can Loki become a better person? And by the end of the series, you think he is. I mean, the choice that's made at the end, Loki makes the good choice and Sylvie makes the bad choice. And I think that's really fascinating, because one character would choose everything, the status quo staying as it was. Another character would go for chaos, but be their own person. And I found that really, really interesting and really clever. And Amy, you mentioned you were a bit bored by the last episode. We'll talk about it. I really liked that last episode, but I think for me, because it was closure, and I'm a big fan of Jonathan Majors, the actor who played Kang at the end as well. For me, I really enjoyed that. He held the show for about 15 minutes with a monologue. So, yeah, I mean, we could move on here to talk about some of the characters here. Let's talk about, the cast itself, the standout performances. I'm going to just mention Jonathan Major, because he was an unknown character. And normally with these Marvel series, like they did with WandaVision and The Winter Soldier, the big baddie is generally a twist of someone who's already in the show, like it was with Agatha in WandaVision, spoiler, and with Sharon Carter, spoiler, in The Winter Soldier. But this was, I think, a bit of a brave move from Marvel, because they introduced this character right at the end of the show. And if you're not a Marvel expert, yes, you're expecting a big bad, but you've no idea who this person is. And I thought that was really interesting, that he would then have to come out. And interesting, he came out of the elevator munching an apple. I got some really Snake, the serpent in the tree vibes, Adam and Eve vibes from him when he came out. Because there is this kind of overarching, is he a god? Is he God himself? Or is he the serpent, the temptation? Because then he talks about free will, and it's very much these philosophical religious themes. But I thought personally, I really enjoyed that kind of. It was essentially a 3-person show. Like, it was almost like a theatrical show there. And I really enjoyed the exposition and how he talked about exactly how the timeline was created. And you suddenly understand what that being massive sort of ring around the asteroid they're on is in this void. And I really liked that. I liked the closure. I liked his delivery. He was very unpredictable. It was almost like a Heath Ledger performance in his kind of quirkiness. And it held my attention really, really closely. But what did you think? Not just about Jonathan Majors, but any other characters in the show that you really liked, Amy?
I think I was very much drawn to Sylvie. It's always nice to see a female protagonist, really, although she may be described as an anti-hero.
You mean like an antagonist? You mean
antagonist? Yes, an antagonist rather than a protagonist. So yeah, I really enjoyed her. I enjoyed her twists and her turns. I enjoyed how she ended up dragging Loki on this journey as well. So for me, I very much enjoyed that performance. It's nice to see Tom Hiddleston. I almost feel like he didn't get to perform as much. I felt that in the same way that you felt that his character had developed, I almost felt like the Loki I knew was being stripped away a bit. But then again, I am the person who does enjoy and I quote, 2 hours action film with a positive resolution at the end.
Sorry.
So, no, this is it. But this is why it's really good that we're both on the podcast and we're all on the podcast together, because we both have really different views of the same thing. So, yeah, for me, that's my standout performance. And I do agree that Kang was very good. Because I have lots of friends that do shows, I'll often go and support my friends in shows. And no matter how good the show is, I'll go, yeah, but it's just D, isn't it, really? Just D on the stage. Whereas I've got a couple of friends. So one of my friends is an actress called Leanne Freeth, and she's incredible. And whenever I go and see her in something, Leanne utterly disappears. And a character's in front of me. She's absolutely astounding. And with, Jonathan Majors. To be fair, his acting, while I was a bit sleepy, it did completely draw me in. And he did come across as an incredibly strong, established person.
Yeah.
It wasn't a case of, there's someone who they've hired and paid some money to say some lines. He was extremely good, so I can completely understand why he would be your standout.
Yeah, just want to mention that obviously Sylvia was played by Sophia Di Martino, who I thought, I agree with, was very good. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, very much liked her performance as well. So that was very good. Owen Wilson was actually better than I thought he would be. So I was pleasantly surprised by him. I think his character didn't have many opportunities to grow until the end. And I do feel like it's kind of, he actually played it really, really well. So I enjoyed that. The other person that I was just thinking of is Hunter B15, who's played by Wunmi Masaku.
She's very good.
Really good actress. And she just had a screen presence. Whenever she was on the screen, you would just pay attention. And so I loved how they sort of finished her bit off at the end of the finale. So yeah, no, it's really, she was a really good one. Yeah, apart from that, the Miss Minutes is an interesting one, but
Tara Strong's character.
Tara Strong, yeah, she played that. Well, she's done a lot of voiceover stuff, so I really.
Does she do the?
She's Harley Quinn. Isn't
she's Harley Quinn.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Yes, she was interviewed mid-series and kind of hinted that there was more of her to come. And I thought Miss Minutes was very sort of a malevolent character at the end. Quite the scariest thing in the show. I thought she was scarier than Kang, to be honest.
When she popped up at the end, I was just like, "Whoa, okay, that's a lot darker than I thought it would go." And then I was like, "Right, fair enough." She's not my friend anymore. I could be
utterly wrong, but I was sure that the big statues that are in that forum had again. I keep saying this, I was a bit sleepy, I could have been seeing things. But the hooded statues, I'm sure I saw that they had clock faces for faces.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I didn't spot that.
But I think there's so much. I think, for me, that's actually a really interesting character, because I'm sure there's a lot more going on there. I'm sure she's far more sentient than, or not even sentient, far more alive than the sentient being that we're led to believe in the early part of the series. But also, again, going back to design, I love the movement, how they've, based on this very 1950s nuclear fallout type thing, and just the movement of her walking, it's straight out of Steamboat Willie. It's that proper old Disney original animation.
17 frames per second sort of cartoon.
Oh, it's just, yeah. So I think, actually, do you know what? I'm really interested to find out about Miss Minutes.
That's good, and we'll speculate later on, actually, in the podcast. I mean, I've got to give some time to Gugu Mbatha-Raw as well, who played Ravonna. She's been in lots of things. I thought she was very good in this as well. A very strident, very confident sort of character. Who again had her own sort of twists and turns in the plot. So she plays Ravonna Renslayer, and in the comics, she is the love interest for Kang.
Ooh,
so
okay.
That is known. It's not a spoiler. That is known. So I think when we speculate about the next season, I think that we can talk about her. I really liked. I liked the glance at the end to the statue of Kang. Again, we'll talk about that later on. They what's really clever here is it's not a massive cast.
No.
If you look back at the who plays what, it's not a massive cast, but really strong talent. And obviously now Disney can sign whoever they want to whatever they want. They can print their own money really when it comes to the shows. And that's, again, I think that's very good for them, but it's also very good for the viewer. we're going to get some very high quality stuff from them. Let's just look at what's next and how this TV series will impact the Marvel universe. And obviously there's a film coming up pretty soon, which is Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. The name now makes more sense. Mm-hmm. We know from WandaVision that she's going to be in the film as well. It links forward to the film. I'm very excited, having seen the whole season now, and it's obviously the exact effect that Disney want. I'm very excited about the next films and season 2 of Loki. How, in terms of everything else that's going on, like our usual characters, like the Hulks and the Captain Americas, how do you think this series will impact that? Are we past that now? Is it all a clean sheet for? Is it Phase 4 coming into now?
Yeah, Phase 4.
How do you feel about that?
I feel like because of the whole nature of there being these offshoots from the clean timeline, or the perfect timeline, it's because this is nestled in between films technically that already exist. I don't think it can necessarily. The only thing that could happen in future films, I think, will be the appearance of the TVA. In the same way that S.H.I.E.L.D. pop up here and there, and a mythical creature, Hydra appear as well. So I think it may just be that TVA just associated use. They occasionally talk about them.
So whenever we the films had their sort of mid-credit scenes, and quite often some of them were like there's one with the Watchers at the end. I mean, were we going to start to see sort of end credit scenes where people are popping out of those little yellow gateways at the end, and just sort of little nods to something else? I mean, it strikes me as a very clever way of kind of sellotaping different films together whenever you want to. I'm with you. I'd like to see the TVA appear more, but I guess it depends what happens in season 2. Because actually, if there's a shredding of the timelines, do we even need the TVA anymore? If the jig is up in respects, although is it? Because obviously Loki goes back at the end, and Mobius has got no idea who he was, and that really gave me goosebumps, because that's the worst scenario for Loki. He's left his own timeline. He's seen in the holoprojector his relationship with his brother improving, and then him dying. He's forged these relationships with the people at TVA. He's gone back, and they've gone again. So I would imagine that perhaps season 2 is Loki trying to reconnect with Mobius again, or get out of his jail cell in the case of what was happening in the episode. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Shall we? Have you any other comments about the impact Loki has on the MCU, Alex? Before we move on, or speculate?
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll come up in Multiverse of Madness. I think that's the obvious one. Also, because I'm not quite sure of the timing of where this sits. So you have Thor coming up as well. Thor: Love and Thunder, I think it's called.
Yes.
And so that's coming up as well. And so you'd think that it would have an impact on that. But I think the challenge you have with Marvel is that sometimes these things, they're linked together, but they don't really change the story. It becomes quite subtle when it's not their story to tell, if that makes sense. So I feel like you may end up like the TVA, for example, may become a throwaway bit of canon that sort of comes up maybe once in Multiverse of Madness, but other than that, it doesn't impact anything else, because otherwise it all becomes a bit of a blur, and they probably want to have a focus in each film.
Bit of a nightmare to manage in terms of writing as well, I imagine. I mean, we've got What If, this Disney Plus series coming up in August. It premieres in August 11th. And it's taking sort of premises like what happened if Peggy Carter had taken the super soldier serum instead of Steve Rogers. And I wonder, because obviously these are different multiverses, I wonder if perhaps the TVA will be involved in that somehow. Maybe as the narrator, we travel through these portals to look at these universes. So it becomes like a visual construct for us to sort of travel through, or if they just leave it as every episode is different. I don't know. I'm really intrigued by those series. there must be. I mean, there must be something to do with Loki in there somewhere. Loki in there somewhere as well. What do you think, Amy?
I think, in terms of what might happen in the next season, do you mean?
Either or. Yeah, we can
But
speculate.
the next season, I think that we're going to see more of Miss Minutes. And I think it may turn out that actually Miss Minutes is higher up the ladder than we thought. And is Miss Minutes, or is someone else behind Miss Minutes?
Well, we know that Kang is. They go back to Loki goes back to the TVA, and Kang is now very much in charge visually. You can see the statue of him. I love that moment. That's whoa, things have changed. But it seems to me that it's not a very nice Kang in charge. And I wonder if that affects TVA policy as well, how they affect the timeline or prune, or how they go in and just does every timeline become a resource to be exploited? And I'm wondering if obviously Kang is also in this Doctor Strange film. How are they going to manage that? Like you said, in terms of the timing. So. Yeah, I see Loki being much more of a loner in this next series, and perhaps he's striving to find his lost love, because they make this kiss at the end of the series, which must have felt like a bit like the Back to the Future moment where you're kissing your own sibling. It felt a very PG kiss, didn't it, when you watched it as well? It wasn't a proper 45-degree slant sort of face churn. It was very much a peck and off you go. And I think I enjoyed that kind of twist in his heart as she threw him out and threw to the TVA so she could deal with Kang. And I wonder if it's going to be him chasing her through the different multiverses. I don't know how he's going to do that if he hasn't got the help of the TVA on his side. But we've also got to speculate what's Ravana up to, because she left, didn't she, with a mission. And has Loki been sent into a strand that, obviously, he's in a different strand to when he came from because things are different? Has she, so there's lots of speculation there. Any other thoughts? It's a tricky one, isn't it?
No, there's so much that could happen. I think it's just, I think it'll be they're just going to have to pick a different story and work out how to pick up the pieces from everything. But it's difficult because it was so well formed in the first episode, how they set everything up. Whereas I think it's a lot harder to do that in season 2.
What would you like to happen?
I don't know. I think I'd quite like more self-referential stuff. That was one of the most fun bits, was the episode where he goes to he gets zapped and he goes to like the world of Loki's.
Yeah,
and I think that was quite fun.
It's like Rimmerworld, wasn't it? Almost.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
And I quite like the idea of bits more than that. Maybe meeting his doppelganger a bit more and doing more engagement with that would be fun.
What we want is more Lokis from this series called Loki.
Exactly.
I would like to see him going back through all the previous 20 Marvel films and cocking up all the storylines. So going back and, like I said, like I don't know, pushing a hero off a mount or something so they die when they shouldn't have done, or just changing everything. I don't know, or maybe going back and in the timeline and realizing that because Kang has because the timeline's shredded, all of his history, weird things are happening. So you're going back and seeing wrecked timelines. I don't know.
That's kind of what I wanted to see at the start. Like, that was kind of what I thought would happen. And it was quite different. They had a story to tell, and it wasn't really about that as much. So,
well, what the main style of this show has been very much character development, slower, longer, talky scenes. And I think the director is very much inspired by, like the scenes in Inglourious Bastards and Before Sunrise and all the sort of different films and TV series. Perhaps they will have a tonal change for the next series. I imagine obviously it's not written yet, but they have ideas. But I imagine they'll get feedback from the viewers and their thoughts. I mean, everything I can see from people who've talked about this have said how much they've enjoyed this style of show. Maybe you not so much, Amy, which is fine. But it's fine if it's not your thing. I really like this slower style. Actually, I've kind of got a little bit over the faster paced films, and we may talk about that in our next little discussion. But I would be very happy to go either way. I'm pleased with what I've seen, but I'd also be pleased with more of a romp through the multiverse for the next series.
I would like to see more mischief from the God of Mischief, because the last episode of Mischief that we saw was really on the train.
Yeah, that was great. His singing was lovely as well, wasn't it?
Yes, and that was because it was a mischief paired up with this actually quite quiet moment of singing that almost felt very gentle and haunting. And then suddenly, and then we drink, and then it kicks off again. And I think that's the Loki that I wanted to see, and I didn't get so much of. So maybe we'll see him more in series 2.
Maybe you're right. Maybe he's going on a kind of a self-destructive bender after what's happened, because he's not very happy, is he? So maybe we see him kind of taking his anger out on the multiverse for the next season, which would be really interesting, and that might explain some of the behaviour of Loki in the films. Maybe it all links back again. Who knows? Okay. Any other thoughts, Alex, before we move on?
No.
Nope.
I think we Loki'd out.
We are. So we are going to continue the discussion now with another Marvel property, which is Black Widow, which in the UK, was it a global release at the same time? I think it was, wasn't it?
I think it was. Yeah,
yes,
I think
because it's streaming on all services. So
they put everything back, but yeah.
Now, it came out a few days before time of recording. We've all seen it, I think, via Disney Plus at our home TVs. I'll probably go and see it again in a cinema at some point. Yes. Okay. So again, if you've not seen Black Widow, pause, watch it, and come back to this show. We're going to talk about our thoughts, and we are going to discuss some of the plot points. So don't listen further forward if you haven't watched it already. So, Amy, your overall thoughts of the film?
I enjoyed it. I really liked it. Of my 2 things that I had to finish watching this week, that was my fave.
How about you, Alex? Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I did really enjoy it. I feel like this was the introduction to Black Widow we needed 2 Marvel movies ago. So it's lovely, but it feels a bit late in the day, and we'll come on to that later. But so I think that's my only fault to it, was that some of it came back. Some of it came back as a bit, bittersweet, if that makes sense, just because of the timing. And I think that's no one's fault. It was a victim of COVID and lots of other things, but also it had been put off, and I think it would have had landed well if it had happened right before Endgame, for example.
Do you think, Alex, it could have been made earlier? Without COVID, do you think it could be made earlier?
No, not really. But I just feel like there should have been. The problem is, it's like the challenge that I have with it is you have this story about Natasha, and obviously the end in Endgame, her sacrifice. So then going back afterwards to look back at things that she did, it doesn't have the same impact as if we had set out this backstory, and people wanted to get more invested in her and wanted to know her more, and then Endgame had happened. So I feel like if it had happened before Endgame, like if it was maybe the last one they snuck in just before it, then I feel like that would have been a good time. And honestly, I think people would have been like, "Whoa, okay, and Endgame's just around the corner. What's going to happen? This sounds great." And then I think would have had such extra impact. So I generally really enjoyed it. I just feel like its timing was the issue.
I think the challenge would have been, Kevin Feige was actually approached for a Black Widow film a while ago, and he said no. And I think at the time, yes, he's a creative guy and he's done a lot of good for Marvel, but I think at the time the numbers were saying this would not go down very well. Until the advent of the Wonder Woman's, which was very, very successful, the first one, and Captain Marvel. A lot of opinion is that it would not have gone down very well. It would have not financially been a good idea to do it, which is a real shame. What is good now is we are seeing a lot more films with central characters being women. and now the time is good. So it's of its time, and I think you're right, Alex. It would be good, and they'd have to get rid of the final scene with the grave if they showed it before Endgame. Yes, I have mixed feelings about the film. I think I need to watch it again. It was a very well-made film. It was very accomplished. Marvel aren't going to go wrong in terms of the production values. I was really excited. I remember my wife and I both watched it at the same time. Becca and I watched it at the same time. And we looked at each other and went, oh, yeah, this looks like a sort of a Bourne film. We love our Bourne films. The sort of the Paul Greengrass running around with the camera shaking and sort of like, very close-up action, CQC action and so on. And, I was looking forward to, we like our gritty espionage thrillers. But then it kind of changed back into a Marvel movie by the end, with all the stuff falling out of the sky. And I know that was in the trailers, so I was ready for it. But I think my taste has changed, as I said before, and I like the more character-driven, plot-heavy, slower burner stuff now. And I don't think that's fair on the movie. I think if you like your Marvel movies, this is a great film. And there were so many points that I enjoyed, and I thought the introduction was really clever as well. How it was a sleepy, sort of young Natasha in Ohio. I loved the cover of Smells Like Teen Spirit as well.
Yeah, that was great.
Was it Smells Like Teen Spirit? Wasn't it? Yeah.
It
it set the mood really well, and you knew things were going to go wrong straight away when you heard that song.
Yeah.
And I thought the introduction was really good. So there's so many good points to this, and it was good fun. But I wanted a more Bourne-like sort of gritty movie. And I guess when you're dealing with superheroes, that's not going to happen, is it? But because Natasha is essentially a ninja rather than a superhero, I was expecting to be a bit less breaking sort of suspension of belief, if that makes sense. It's a bit more sort of. I could see what she could do. I could see that she could. This was real. This would actually happen.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I still enjoyed it. I felt like it was not in my top 10 of Marvel movies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I wouldn't say it's one of my top ones, but I did really enjoy it. I think that introduction, just because you mentioned it, it absolutely ripped me to pieces. I basically spent 20 minutes trying not to cry audibly.
Becca was the same, actually. When she realised,
it was very, as a parent, it's really distressing.
When Becca realised, when my other half realised they were trafficking the girls essentially, and they were all put into that container, she was very upset by that.
Yeah. And then that whole montage of it, which is very incredibly clever in what it's showing.
Yeah.
It just about gives you time to swallow those tears down and move on, whilst also taking in the horror of what's happening.
I think it was a really strong start to the film. I thought this is going to be really good, and I think perhaps it was a little bit let down with the kind of rompy silliness towards the end. If that makes sense. I was a lot more emotionally affected by the end of Loki than I was by this film. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Having compared the two, let's talk about the story. So Becca and I both looked at each other during the film and said, "Isn't this Red Sparrow?" And it's not really at all. There's a lot more intrigue and a lot more toing and froing of different characters in Red Sparrow. This is obviously much more of a popcorn view. What were your thoughts of it, Alex? Let's go with you this time for the first person. Yeah,
so I definitely enjoyed it. I think I understand it, because the purpose of this was to really, paint the backstory of Black Widow. So it was about going back and looking at how she got there. But one of the things that they didn't really focus on is they didn't focus on like any of her training or anything like that. It was like that whole piece was skipped as we've done this. We're not going to cover this again.
I agree with you. I'd like to see more about the Red Room.
Yeah, so it was kind of, the Red Room was an element that was talked about, but in a kind of we don't need to go over this, and everyone was like, no, but that's the cool bit. We want to see that. We want to see a young, maybe a young Natasha learning. We want to see some of the challenges, and that's something we didn't see. The story itself, I think, was fine. It wasn't very deep. Like, didn't have much to it apart from the background around her family, and obviously that came around to the end. But aside from that, it was basically just a bit of exposition. We thought that we'd killed the person, and they weren't killed, so that's what we're going to be doing for the film. And I felt like they could have, it built up on that.
It felt rushed, if you ask me. The writing felt rushed in this. I think they squandered the whole Taskmaster storyline. Mm-hmm. In the comics, it's the character's male. Well, in this, it's the daughter of Ray Winston's character. Yeah. And I think that was really clever. I think changing it to his daughter, put more, more. She was his first test, wasn't she, of the Red Room, and it made me care a bit more about the character, and I was really intrigued by the character. Again, if you're a fan of the comics, you probably know what Taskmaster is, and it was kind of explained that this character could basically mimic every move of the person they were fighting. So essentially, it's like you're fighting yourself, so you can never win. And I thought, again, I need to know more about that. How does that work? And the character said barely 2 words. But this is a child that was involved in this bombing when they were young. There's so much kind of built-up background to that could have been explored. Almost another whole film in itself. I thought Ray Winston, we'll talk about him in a second, but I thought he was very two-dimensional. And it's a shame because Marvel have done really, really well at giving their villains a proper stake in what's going on. Killmonger was a brilliant story in Black Panther, and you sympathised with him. And even, we've just talked about Loki. Loki was a villain, but we've explored so much of his life and sympathised with him. And it felt like Ray Winston was like a sort of a cardboard cutout of a character.
Yeah.
And really bad casting as well. We'll come to that in a second. What about you, Amy?
For me, in terms of the bits I enjoyed, shall we say, I quite enjoyed the trying to figure out who the Taskmaster was. And for a good portion of the film, I thought it was Milena.
Yeah, the sister.
Yeah, the mum. What's the name?
Oh, the mum. Right, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Melina.
Yeah. I thought it was Milena. I thought that's where it was going. But again, it's interesting because for me, I'm coming from a direction of I've never read the comics. I don't know any of the backstory. So it is still that almost procedural drama of figuring out who's who and who's what. So yeah, I like that turnaround. Again, we will talk about Ray Winston later. But I agree with you. Almost anyone could have played him. Really. I love David Harbour.
Yep. I mean,
he's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, and just so funny, and that suited the character so well. The only thing that confused me is that he could speak perfectly grammatical English when you had an American accent, and then when you went all Slovakian or Russian or whatever it was, he lost a lot of his adjoining words, which was distressing to me as an English teacher.
Yes, I think we need to talk about their accents in a second, actually, but we'll come back to that. Yes, the cast were good, and I was a big fan of Florence Pugh. But the accents, you make a very good point. If they could all speak in perfect American at the beginning of the film, I can understand why perhaps they revert back to speaking in Russian dialect itself to converse with the people they're working with. But when they're talking to each other, why couldn't they just speak in American again? They were a family. Why did they suddenly have these accents in when they were over somewhere different? It was very confusing, and I felt like
more distressing to me was if they'd all had the Solskjaer Russian accent, then that's just a lower low.
Yes, you're right. Exactly.
That's cleverness for they are speaking Russian, but you can understand them. But we're going to have them say it with an accent, so you know they're speaking Russian.
Yeah.
But because there was a bit of a mix, it's very confusing for me.
Yes, it was. I watched an episode of The X-Files recently where some of the main characters were German Nazis in a weird alternate universe shifting thing, and one of the characters who's been the head of the FBI for the whole series, Mitch Pileggi, I think the actor's name is, he can speak fluent German. So he starts speaking fluent German in this episode. It was just amazing, and it was brilliant. And I know they can't speak in fluent Russian, but there are ways you can get around that. You could get a voice actor to speak for them, and they have subtitles. I just felt like it was a bit sort of wavy-handy, and it's like, oh, this will do. And that, going back to my point about them kind of rushing this a little bit, it felt like I really think that they've been quite clever releasing this film now at the sort of back end of people coming out of lockdown, because they're going to want to go and see a film. And at the moment, if you go to cinemas in the UK, there's not much on. There's Fast and Furious 9, and a couple of re-release films, Raya and the Last Dragon. So they're going to make their money, whether it's people sitting at home watching it on their TVs.
That's right.
Or at the cinema. And it's done a very good box office, apparently. I don't think it would have done quite as well had there been no COVID, and it would have released slightly different in the timeline.
If there was other competition as well, I think
you would have. And I just think it feels a little bit rushed and a little bit kind of glossed over, this show. Sorry, this film.
I thought this was in the can, though. That's the bit that confuses me.
Yeah.
So I thought that this was ready pre-COVID, and I would have just taken that extra time to work on bits, but I don't know.
Let's go back a little bit and just talk about one particular member of the cast, and that's Ray Winstone. Now, Ray Winstone is a very good actor. I've got a lot of time for him. Brilliant in Sexy Beast, among other films. Now, what was going on here? What happened?
He was given a lame duck of a character, wasn't he? He couldn't do anything with the character because there just wasn't any room for character development at all, none. And I think that's difficult. But then, if that's the case, it's like he wasn't the best person for that. There were other people who would have had more gravitas.
Who would you have chosen, Alex?
So the one that came to mind immediately was Kenneth Branagh from Tenet.
His accent was very good in that.
He was very good at that at that point, and it surprised me at how convincing he was. And so I was like, honestly, he would have been a much better character than that. So I just, I honestly just feel maybe they tried for him and couldn't get him.
I mean, there's also Brian Cox they could have used, isn't there, from the films? Yeah,
that would have worked well. That someone with like gravitas, but knowing that you haven't got time to establish the character, you've got to be able to go straight away, and everyone goes, ooh.
I think Hopkins from Westworld, when his character in Westworld in this would be good as well, Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
I think anybody apart from poor Ray Winstone with his kind of gravelly Cockney sort of drawl, trying to do a Russian accent.
It was.
Well, I think he was doing the same accent as Helen Mirren was in National Treasure.
I'm trying to remember what that is.
I don't think about it too hard. It's painful.
Is it as good as her Cockney accent in Fast and Furious?
Oh, it's weird. It's some sort of American, Irish,
oh really? Oh dear.
English. I'd done a world tour. Not quite sure. I love her character in it, but yeah, I think there are some films where the voice trainer needs to do maybe approach things from a different direction.
So, were there any other actors you liked, Amy?
I like the little sister because because the characterization of it. Lawrence Pugh played it very, very well. The fact that she retained all of the very little sistery things, like this is a fun way to die, and all those little things that a little sister would say. I really enjoyed that, and also again, big spoilers at the end. The sadness of what she deals with at the very, very end of the film as well. It shows that she has grown up a little bit. She's dressing a bit more differently. I really enjoyed her character.
I enjoyed her taking the mick out of the way Natasha landed. That sort of action pose. And even one point when she did it without realising it, went, oh no, or however she reacted. I thought that was quite funny. Yeah, she was good. I think, again, I recognise her, but I can't remember what she's been in. Maybe one of you can find out for me whilst I'm talking. But yeah, she was... I think she was very good at supporting actor for Scarlett Johansson, who was very solid in this role. A very thoughtful, solid character. And she's she knows the character well. She's played the character for a long time now. As you said earlier on, Amy, it's great that we have all these female protagonists in films now, because there are stories to tell and there's more depth. Again, I felt a bit sad about all these other characters, the other girls from the Red Room, who were kind of, again, just scenery, weren't they, really, rather than solid characters. But let's talk about the set pieces. Say again, sorry?
I've got some info. So, Florence Pugh was known for Lady Macbeth, where she played Catherine. A few other fairly small pieces. She's also Little Women. She was in that.
It looks like this film maybe will be a kind of a next step up for her.
And we will be seeing her again. So
she's still in the MCU then?
She's going to be in the MCU in Hawkeye.
Ah, brilliant.
So
I bet that'll be a popular film. Everyone loves Hawkeye.
Which makes sense a little bit about the post-credit scene.
Because she's chasing after him, isn't she?
So that actually does make some sense now. But
yeah,
I was wondering about that.
Yes. Any favourite set pieces that you really enjoyed? I'm going to talk about this in a second.
So set pieces.
I think it was quite good when Black Widow came across Yelena, and they were just I liked that fight.
Oh, at the beginning.
At the beginning, because it almost foreshadowed what happened with the Taskmaster later, because they were replicating what each other were doing, and it was showing they're both actually very worthy adversaries. Yeah.
It was a good scene. It was a very Bourne scene, sort of fighting in a kitchen, smashing things around. Very well choreographed. It was very realistic. The stuntmen and stunt women who did that obviously were working hard in that scene, because it was sort of throwing against walls and smashing through things. I enjoyed that bike ride as well. The kind of the bike ride through the city as they were escaping. I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Again, very Bourne again, isn't it, with the motorbike and the car chase? How about you, Alex?
So a couple of them. One of the ones that stood out to me was the scene where they sat down for dinner, or whatever it was when they. And the reason that stood out for me was because it was really authentic and natural. And I was watching a interview, and they explained that essentially Kate Shortland, the director, basically sat the four of them and they just had dinner a lot of the time, and then did a lot of ad-libbing. So when they got to that scene, because they'd regularly just been sat together, hey, you're the family, or, this is where you sit, enjoy. And so because of that, a lot of the banter that came from that scene, they'd already worked up, because they'd been doing it previously, to try and get themselves into character and while they're eating. So I thought that was a nice touch. The other scene that I enjoyed was the prison break. I really enjoyed that one, particularly from that. I particularly enjoyed David Harbour's part of the scene where he gets the Red Guardian figure, and I love that. It's like a really good nod to itself. So I did enjoy that. I think some of it, and you might, but the end of the film was fairly formulaic, and almost I was almost just waiting for that bit to finish. So,
do you mean the bit where the sky base is falling?
Yeah,
down?
yeah.
Yes, I found that a little bit silly and a bit dull personally, and a bit. It defied reality too much for me. It was a bit too silly, really. Just the way they kind of bounced off things and survived, and I struggled a bit with that. It kind of took a long time to fall, didn't it? As well, that really bothered me. It would just drop, wouldn't it? It would just drop. I'm with you about the whole family thing. I really enjoyed the rivalry between the two sisters, and sort of the joking, and the way they went from being quite horrible to each other at the beginning to much closer towards the end. there's another character we haven't mentioned, which I think Amy quite like, who plays Rick Mason, who is kind of like the fixer guy. He gets the things for them.
Yeah.
So he gets Natasha's helicopter, and she gets her the Quinjet, which ties up another storyline. I always wondered where she got a Quinjet, didn't they? Yeah, I thought he was really a really natural, quite interesting character. I'd like to see more of him in the strangely a non-heroic, just ordinary Joe that can get things. I quite liked him. I imagine he'll be helping out Sharon Carter in another series somewhere or something else, with weapons or something. I don't know.
Well, I mean, every good series has got to have the person who has all the tech.
Yeah, he's
whether
the Q,
it's James Bond or Alex Rider. Yeah.
I like.
I enjoyed that.
I like the dynamic between them. So there was a dynamic between them and Natasha, and it worked really nicely. And it was the kind of thing that made me yearn for, what were the missions and the kind of or the jobs that Natasha did, which he's sorted her out for, and where they've kind of, she saved his bacon or something. It's alluded to, but you want to see it.
There's history there, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. So could have developed that a bit more.
So we have discussed how Black Widow kind of sits with the rest of the MCU content quite a degree. Is that it for Black Widow now? Do you think is she done in the timeline for the MCU? Have we seen the end of her story?
No, I think that because of this next film that's coming up with all these multiple timelines, I think that's going to be, I don't want to say the word excuse, an opportunity to basically resurrect the dead. So all the characters that we've mourned for have the potential to get back up again, and then we have to mourn for them again. I mean, Loki came back for a whole series after we watched him die. We've seen her die. She's come back for a whole film, and now there's multiple timelines. Why can't we see almost anyone?
Does that not, though, get rid of some of the emotional tension of someone dying in a film or a series, though?
Yeah.
I mean,
I kind of hope they don't do this, but I think that they've got an opportunity to. That
was always the strength of a series like the Game of Thrones. When someone was dead, they were dead, pretty much.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem with this happening at this point in the MCU. So anytime that they bring her back, it's going to feel like this one did well, so we're going to try and do another story. Whereas, if you think about maybe Wonder Woman, for example, it's a completely different story. But if you think about that, and obviously it's DC, but the thing is, for that you have a rich history of things, and you just think, your mind races. Whereas because we know that there's a final end, my mind's not thinking, tell me more about this, tell me more about that, because I have that finality there that I know it can't proceed past.
I mean, from the very fact that some of the voice cast in the What If series are not the original actors, that kind of tells me that there's certain finality here for this sort of crew.
Yeah,
which is a good thing. It's time to move on, I think, and see new stories. And
I think Scarlett Johansson said this is like it's come to a close now.
Well, she's going to get. I know it sounds terrible. But she's going to get to the point where she's too old to do the role anyway.
Well, totally, but
and she'll want to explore different roles, won't she? That are a bit,
of course,
more grounded, perhaps.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts about Black Widow? Anything else you want to add at all?
So, I wonder whether can we obliterate Ray Winston's accent? Can we remove it from the timeline? Do you think that's
Would you
possible?
like the Kenneth Branagh cut?
Get the TVA.
Yes.
We're going to ask for a Kenneth Branagh cut, are we?
Yes, please. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I would like anyone else to be involved in that accent.
Okay, so I think you've noted here, Alex. Much like the Red Room, you'd like to just wipe him completely from any sort of existence.
Well, yeah, and that's one of my thoughts. Is like there's a whole thing of a network of Red Room operatives. That's basically, I mean, you'd think, they left that one open, but they didn't really. They just ignored it. They just kind of alluded to it in 20 seconds while they were putting up some visuals, and then they just never mentioned it again.
Give Ray the red mist, and then he'll forget his accent. Is that what you're saying?
That would be good. Let's do that.
Okay, let's do some housekeeping. You can find Alex on Twitter at Alex Hansford. You can find Amy at Awakey, and you can find me at John PR Evans. You will find our Twitter account, which is at PlayPauseTurn, on Twitter as well. You can also go to our website, which is playpauseturn.show. This has been Play Pause Turn, and thank you for listening.